What are cryptocurrencies?
Hey, hey, hey.
What are NFTs?
A non-fungible token.
Time to buy Bitcoin.
Bitcoin just seems like a scam.
What's up? Bitcoin!
Hello everyone and welcome back to On the Ledger. This is your host Mo Sayed, back once again on your weekly rendezvous from Paris. Today we've got Robin Schmidt back on the show. If you don't know who Robin is, well, it simply means that you're missing out on the coolest crypto content out there. Robin is a creative filmmaker and a gifted storyteller. He's been producing crypto films in his own unique and absolutely enthralling way for years now, and is currently the head of video and multimedia at the Defiant, where he covers the latest DeFi and NFT innovations. Last but not least, he's also the man behind Ledger's YouTube show, School of Block, that I'm glad to be producing with him. Robin, welcome back on the Ledger. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. It's an absolute pleasure to be here talking about something that I know both you and I are really passionate about and excited to kind of share with the rest of the world, because it's a rabbit hole that you escape from with great difficulty, I think.
So to those of you who don't know, Robin and I actually did a first podcast a few months ago, which was the beginning of a series of creative reflections that we intend to produce whenever something's worth it. And as you've probably guessed, we got a pretty fascinating project to discuss today. That project is Lost Poets by the one and only Pak.
So here is an original poem, because some ideas can only be expressed in film. Isn't that poetic?
Robin actually went deep down Pak's rabbit hole, as he said, and produced 3 Netflix-worthy investigative films with a touch of sci-fi, pop culture, and art criticism. So hang on, because today, he'll be walking us through his Pak journey. Robin, are you ready, my friend?
I am so ready. Let's do this.
From Paris, this is On the Ledger, Season 2, Episode 4, Robin, Pak, and the Lost Poets. Here we go. So, Robin, as we usually do, we're going to start with our not-so-stupid questions. So, how would you explain, in a few simple sentences, Lost Poets to someone who hasn't heard of it?
So Lost Poets is an NFT project that has a timeline. So you buy an NFT, and then you're confronted with a series of decisions to make about that NFT that will lead you in a number of different ways, but that is entirely in your hands. So it has a strategy element to it, and it's meant to play out over the course of a year. I mean, most NFTs are kind of buy, and then the roadmap evolves over time. This is an NFT where the roadmap has been extremely carefully planned by the creator, Pak, and we're all participants in this magical, mystical journey into something whose destination we don't know, but we know for sure that we're going to be entertained along the way. So that makes it quite different from other NFT projects that people might have encountered, because the level of depth here is really fantastic.
It is, and how it differs from other PFP projects is that level of depth, although it could also be used as a PFP, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, well, PFP, if anyone doesn't know, stands for profile picture, and Bored Apes, CryptoPunks, these are the ones that people associate with that. It's a JPEG, essentially, that you can use as your identity, and because it's unique and verifiable on chain, it can only belong to you. And that means that it can become irrevocably tied to you as an individual. And you might be anonymous, you might not, but it doesn't matter. And it also represents some kind of social signaling. It tells people that you're part of a tribe, that you're, in a sense, culturally woke, or you're aligned with the philosophies of a certain project. Pak is very unusual because Pak has, up to this point, been a singular artist, someone producing work of great beauty and great technical skill that has been sold at massive auction houses. But that is someone creating and then you purchase. With Lost Poets, it's much more of a communal experience. It feels like a PFP in the sense that people represent themselves with these bizarre looking images, but they also represent themselves as being culturally woke in the sense that they volunteered to be part of this experience because they value it. And there's a lot of talk about NFT art having value. And we've seen it with art blocks, that generative art is a growth category that people understand to be something of importance to the 21st century and to art history in general. But this is, I guess, where Pak is coming, because there's one step further, which is participation over time. Whereas art blocks, you participate in the moment of creation. With Lost Poets, you participate continuously, and it plays out in a number of different ways. But that very much marks Lost Poets as one of the most advanced or progressive NFT PFP executions that we've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely. And I actually remember quite well the day of the drop. Both of us were in a meeting, and it's fair to say that none of us expected this. Fast forward a week, you told me you were about to make not one, not two, but 3 films about it. What made you do that? What changed your mind? What was like that light bulb moment where you said, okay, this is something different?
Well, you very kindly missed out an important piece of that conversation, which was you said, "Are you doing the pack drop?" And I said, "No, I don't like the work. I don't like the work," and I didn't, and I didn't do the drop, and I didn't like the work. So what persuaded me that there was something here that I should be taking notice of? Well, there's a couple of things. One of them was actually you and your enthusiasm for it, because I mean I respect your opinion, but I also was like, well, if Mo's interested in this, what am I missing? Second part was, I'm fortunate enough to be part of a DAO called Gremlins, which is made up of some of the most kind of prominent names in this space. We're talking Pranksy and 888 and Jimmy. And this group is wild for Park, beyond wild. The person that bought the Pixel is also a member of that group. So I was connected to and in conversation with people who've been Puck supporters and Puck collectors from the very beginning of this journey. And they love Puck. It's not love as in loving your football team or loving Bored Apes. This is a very different level of engagement and excitement, because these are sophisticated collectors and people who, you know, really stand by the investments and the purchases that they make. That was a big prompt to me to get beyond my own personal biases and take a proper look. I also think there was a reason that it felt almost impossible for me to go down as deep as I might need to tell the story properly, because I think one of the things that I hope people get out of the work that we put out on the Defiant and with School of Block as well, that we don't just do the easy headline and we don't just copy paste from CoinDesk or wherever. We actually do the homework. Park, as I discovered, is a subject that requires an exhaustive level of research and understanding to form what I hope is some kind of considered opinion. And that's why I ended up doing 3 films, because as I started investigating this and going into what was there, I realized that there was a very deep, extended journey that was required to understand, or at least be grounded in what Puck was attempting to do with Lost Poets. And that's why, you know, the film we made is an hour and a half long, and it doesn't go deep enough in some respects.
Yeah, and I want to take a step back here and maybe provide some sort of an overview to the listeners who don't know much about Puck. Maybe you can give us like a quick overview about Puck and why The Lost Poets is quite disruptive when compared to what he's been doing before. And there was some sort of a transition there. And you actually pointed it out quite well in the movie, but I just want to give the listeners a quick overview of that.
Well, there are a few artists in this space that represent the journey of the space because they've evolved with it. I would point out Trevor Jones in that. Trevor's someone who comes from the traditional art world and was always merging technology into what he did. He did paintings of QR codes, and he came from that background. Puck was a motion graphics designer, but also a coder and a developer. And it's very rare that you see those skills in the same person. And so what people's introduction to Puck would most likely have been was as one of, you know, the prominent NFT artists. So producing works that you could buy in different editions, either a Nifty Gateway. So there might be an edition of 5 or a 1 of 1. And there was a lot of artists that were doing that. And that's absolutely fine. And, you know, that promoted the space and promoted crypto art as a category. That's sort of what we'd been accustomed to seeing from Puck. And it began to take on a sheen of the absurd and satire as this year went on. So instead of it just being, well, here's a beautiful piece, it started becoming, well, here's a beautiful piece with a message that's going to challenge you and make you think and make you look at yourself and don't ask the question, well, why on earth am I buying this? So it started to become much more of a challenge to collectors and owners. And there was a lot of commentary about the space and about the stupidity of the space, which then kind of came to a head with the Pixel, which was part of the fungible collection, which went on sale at Sotheby's. And the Pixel is it's just a pixel. It's one gray pixel, 50% black, 50% white. And it went for over $1 million, $1.4 million.
That's insane.
A single pixel. And now we just have to take a moment just to contextualize this, because it's not like artists being confrontational and provocative is anything new, because it's not. I mean, was one of the hallmarks of the great 20th century art movement, is the ability to completely challenge art criticism and what we believed art was, Duchamp, Warhol. It's just that no one had dared do it in this space, at least not in this way. But as you discover with Park, there is a very clear and very well-reasoned argument behind everything that they do. And if you take the time to discover it, you just go, holy crap, this is really amazing.
Yeah, it feels like it's a rabbit hole and a constant mind game that's happening. And what's fascinating about Lost Poets and Park's provocative approach to it is how much it addresses and somewhat denounces how collectors approach NFTs. Always looking for the rarity game, what is the rarest asset that you can get out there and flip. And I think that with Lost Poets, you just can't figure that out. Maybe you can also set the table by explaining how it functions and how it started and how it's evolving at the moment.
Well, there's a lot of work that you have to do to understand the evolution of Puck, the artist. And it goes from things like, if you did a drop on Nifty Gateway earlier in the year, and Nifty Gateway was kind of the place where the big prestige artists congregated for a while. What happened was you had a one of one, and that was the prestige piece, and that was going to be the one that went for 5-6 figures. Then you had an edition of 5 or an open edition. So artists were being required to create tiers of assets, so tiers of content. And of course, in your mind, you're thinking, well, the one of one is my best work, and then the edition of 5 is slightly less good work, and then the edition of 50 is like, it's sort of mediocre. If you're an artist, that's completely absurd. Like, every artist wants to be producing their best work. They don't want to deliberately cripple their output just to satisfy the marketing. And I think that's what Park had begun to really push against. So Park released a collection called The Title, and the title was, I can't remember how many of it was, but every single piece in that collection looked identical, but they just had different names, and they were priced differently. So there was one that was called The Unsold, which was priced at $1 million, and nobody bought it. And it was just playing with this idea that what something is called could have a material bearing on how much it's worth, which is, of course, completely absurd. But then when it played out at the sale, it did exactly what Park was expecting them to do. The Fungible took that one further and started playing with ideas of, who's buying, why are they buying, where are they buying, how are they getting to the art. And Park was starting to play with things, adding puzzle elements into the pieces. And that's where, when you saw the Pixel, it was just like this inflection point where everything that was dumb and stupid about NFTs could be boiled down to this single profound statement: the Pixel. That's just like everything that is insane and stupid and pointless about crypto art can be just reduced. So it's almost reducing the impact of the artist and reducing the relevance of the artist, because there is simply no art required to deliver a pixel that is 50% white and 50% gray. And yet it required an absolutely stunning level of artistry to have the chutzpah to actually do that in the first place. That pixel, as I discovered through my kind of deep investigations into Puck, was, I guess, the end of an act in the evolution of Puck the artist, because as I discovered, the Puck had been obsessed with singularities and with this idea of infinite density since 10 years ago. And there was constant references to that through Puck's tweets. And what it suddenly occurred to me was that this pixel was a singularity. It was a point of infinite density. And a singularity is the starting point of the Big Bang, an emergence into a brand new universe. And so when you look at Lost Poets, you can kind of see it as a completely new universe being built in Puck's artistic evolution. And that's why it's so fascinating. So the way it works is you in the sale purchased pages, and pages were these gray squares that look very similar to the pixel, and they had some texturing on them that felt a little bit like the texture you might find on a Renaissance painting. It wasn't just a clean graphic surface. So those pixels were EIP 1559s, so they were individually identical.
Mm-hmm. ERC.
And you would be, yeah. So yes. Sorry, I'm mixing up my EIPs. It's been one of those days. It's been one of those days jumping between different projects. But there are different NFT standards, and this is the NFT standard that allows you to produce multiple copies of the same thing. And these pages were all identical, so everyone was buying the same page. I think they were for 0.32 ETH, so not the cheapest NFTs in the book. And there were different ways that you could access this if you owned Ash, which is Puck's own currency that you can earn by burning Puck's art, which is pretty profound. We should probably come back to that at some point. You could get more of these things, and people grabbed them, got on a leaderboard, and they would be given an Origin NFT. Now, these Origin NFTs are black and white parents, I guess, of Lost Poets. The Lost Poets themselves are created by burning pages. So you take a page, you offer it up to the gods, and then what comes back is a Lost Poet. And a Lost Poet is a GAN-generated digital artwork that is kind of created at random, and everyone is individual and unique, and created from a series of images that have been fed to the algorithm, to the AI, and it will spit out an image that can look very human, but it can also look completely abstract, and it can also look extremely unsettling and weird. Mm-hmm. But that's what GAN processed imaging does. It blends and merges a set of images together to create something else. And these Lost Poets are the output of that algorithm. And so from there, you can then go into a journey of, well, what is the rarity that's built into my Lost Poet? What is the origin? Where does it come from? And what meaning can be derived from inside this Lost Poet? And you can see all this in the attributes of the poet itself. But then on top of that, poets can be fed pages. So any pages that weren't turned into Lost Poets can then be used to alter and evolve the Lost Poets over time. In ways that haven't been entirely made clear yet, but it's all built around this idea of language and the story of the Library of Babel from Borges. We can go into all of that. But am I doing a good job of painting
You're
the picture?
doing a great job. It's not an easy project to explain, not at all. And yeah, like all these poets actually emanate from the Origin poets that you mentioned. And it was actually quite surprising at the beginning, the day of the mint, when I looked at the supply and it was 65,000. No one actually knew why there were 65,000 pages that you could mint. And comparing to other supplies of NFT collections, which were, capped at a maximum of 20,000, I think the average is around 10,000. This was kind of surprising. And when you actually made the calculation of the price of each page, multiplied by the overall supply, I think it was $70 million that were actually, worth of pages that were minted in less than 90 minutes.
Yeah, and people reference Beeple's sale, which was $69 million, and that was a single collector that put up that much money. Park sold these, as you rightly said, for $70 million. It was the biggest kind of instance of value creation in the NFT space of its type.
It's crazy.
And those numbers were not random either. You talked about there being 65,000 of them. There's actually a bunch of meaning around computing and software. It was 65,536. And there's just one of these weird things. That's exactly the maximum character limit for one message in WhatsApp. It's the exact number of characters in the original Unicode, which is the standard for consistent encoding, representation, and handling of text expressed in most of the world's writing systems. And text and language are like this big recurring theme in Lost Poets. Is it worth talking about the Lost Poets story, the Tower of Babel story itself?
Yeah, sure, go on. It's a very interesting one.
So the Tower of Babel is a story about a library in which is contained every instance of possible pages of all the characters in the alphabet. And it's a metaphor for the absurdity of infinite expression and how if you have an infinite library and infinite possible combinations of letters and words, somewhere in that library, you will have the perfect copy of Hamlet. You will have the perfect copy of War and Peace. It'll be in there somewhere. You just have to be able to find it. And so for anyone surfing that library, there is both overwhelming possibility because you might find a gem in there that no one else has discovered. They might find this incredible masterpiece. But there's also overwhelming possibility in the sense that there's so much to go through and most of it is gibberish that it might drive you mad, but it's just this kind of overbearing impossibility of discovery. And so it's kind of reflecting the process of being creative. That I seem to remember, I forget which sculptor it was, but they said, when you start with a block of stone, it's actually very, very simple. All you have to do is cut away everything that isn't the sculpture. And that's this beautiful way of looking at creativity.
It's fascinating.
Is not necessarily a process of invention, but a process of discovery. And so that's sort of where the Library of Babel comes from. And where I ended up going was kind of digging deep into this idea that imagination, creative endeavor, and thinking for yourself were absolutely essential ingredients in the Packverse. When we saw these satirical, critical collections come out that were, as you said, denouncing people's stupidity and irrational FOMO, it felt like Puck was coming from a position of superiority and authority. But what has actually happened is with Lost Poets, we've seen a transition from Puck, the professor or the pulpit preacher, to Puck kind of just being a schoolmaster. It's someone that's with you along the way and actually wants to see you succeed rather than make fun of you or mock you or criticize you for FOMO. That there's a very different tone to everything. It's Puck is tweeting more about we and about community. And the weird conclusion I came to is that there were these two distinct moments or executions of Puck, because it's very hard to talk of Puck as a person or an artist. You kind of have to talk of Puck as just Puck. But Puck, the artist that was doing these big drops on, in Sotheby's or Nifty Gateway, that was in the past, and that Puck now was an art movement or a point in time where everyone was invited. And I came to the conclusion that what Puck had done was in fact decentralize themselves, and that they'd spread the Puck universe and idea to the winds and to the stars. It was bizarre. I was not expecting to end up coming to that kind of conclusion.
I think that's actually transitions perfectly to the question I wanted to ask you, which you partly answered. But as someone, personally, I've been a fan of Puck for a while now, and I actually learned a lot watching the films. And the fact that you're mentioning decentralization is super interesting, because my question was, in your own opinion, how do you think Puck is able to always and constantly be 10 steps ahead, constantly be everywhere, and always, putting on, leaving hints and breadcrumbs, as you've called them in your movie, and Easter eggs all over the place for people to follow and kind of figure out what the overall, image is. How do you think he's able to do that? But I'm calling a he, but he's not a he. He's he, she, they are able to do that.
You trip up over the pronoun all the time.
Yeah.
I had it myself. Like I was always tripping up over the pronoun. Okay, so there are some clues in here. Lost Poets is broken down into acts. So there's an act 1, an act 2, an act 3, and act 4, and so on and so on. And the last act is called the twist. This is movie language. So we're dealing with a cinematic experience, or something that's akin to a cinematic experience. And this is, giving art ownership and art collection a timeline. And it turns it into a piece of immersive theater. There is clearly been a spine of thought sitting in the middle of Park's work for the longest time. And that's about AI, it's about technology, it's about singularities, it's about interrogating the birth and genesis of ownership of what art can be or should be or could be. And you look at the work and it seems to be derived from inspirations of physics. One of the comparisons I drew is with the Cassini missions. If you looked at the tonality of the images, the kind of silver tone monochrome, they look exactly like the images that the Cassini satellite was sending back from its mission to Saturn. Identical. So there's clearly some obsessions there. What's interesting is that hasn't wavered over the last 10 years. So the kind of controlling ideas and the controlling obsession, because I think when artists land on something they're obsessed with, it can fuel their creative endeavors for a very long time. We see that in Picasso's different phases of output. I mean, Picasso painted an extraordinary amount of work, but you can very clearly see that there were obsessions that drove him forward through the different phases of his work. Pak has clearly been in that process. When I write a script for a film, I don't write it in a linear fashion. I don't just start at the beginning and finish at the end. It's always in pieces, and I find a bit here, and then I go back and rewrite. And you're constantly rewriting, and you're constantly going back and constantly going back. It's tempting to think that Park is 10 steps ahead because they're so able to go back and cherry pick pieces of their Twitter account that make sense and that plug into what they're saying. But there's a ton of stuff on Park's Twitter account that doesn't tie into anything. It's just that when Park retweets it, Park is cherry picking the bits that make sense. And that's not to say that Park isn't 10 steps ahead. It's more that Park is able to create this feeling of being very much in control of the narrative by virtue of the fact that A, nobody else does that, and B, the groundwork has already been laid. So in a sense, they can say, okay, well, I tweeted this and I tweeted this and this was all relevant. And now I can fold that into this narrative and make people feel like it's all part of the thing. And that's a very beautiful skill. I've never seen it play out like this before. But if you talk to people that write screenplays, it's all about setups and payoffs, right? Mm-hmm. You set up an idea in Act 1 and you pay it off in Act 3. Luke, I am your father at the end of Star Wars and at the end of Empire Strikes Back. That was set up right,
from the start.
3 hours earlier in Star Wars. So these things you're able to retrofit them as you're going along. So we had to give Pak a lot of credit, but at the same time, it's very easy to start tying those threads together. I obviously have to be a skilled narrator and a skilled architect of your adventure, but at the same time, it's once you have those pieces in play, it's very easy to kind of direct people the way you want them to, because they're kind of expecting it and they want it. And so you start doing it more and more. And I'm sure that Park was just kind of looking at the body of what they'd done and said, this would actually make a really great kind of trigger for this and a trigger for that. But also there's, Park is clearly somebody that spends a lot of time thinking about what matters to them and creating work that is consistent with ideas that matter. And it's just a funny experience seeing all of this. But I think at the end of the day, they just spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and they are an expert in what they do. And because of that, they're able to design experiences that I think really respect their audience. And I think that if there's anything to be drawn from this, it's not that Puck thinks we're all idiots. Puck thinks that we are lost poets that can rediscover something, and Puck knows the audience better than anyone. It's one of the things that would be the first article in if I were to make an NFT consultancy, it would be the first thing that would be written on the door. It's like, respect the culture, and nobody respects the culture more than Puck.
I love that.
If you see people coming in, they go, "Oh, I'm just going to make some money out of this," but Puck doesn't do that. It's a very different journey you're on.
Definitely. And he ends up making money more than anyone who's in it for the money. So now that we've spoken about the past and the present, let's take a glimpse into the future. So, and I need kind of to recap the situation of Lost Poets. So we were able to mint pages a few weeks ago, and a couple of weeks afterwards, we were able to turn our pages into poets. Now we're almost in Act 3, where we can feed our poets pages and name them and maybe create some poetry. Where do you see this project going, and what do you think will be the final form of the project? You've mentioned the twist, but there will be another act afterwards. What do you think will be the final form or the final message of where we're going?
So you're right to bring that up, because the thing that I recognized when I was making the films was that I was spending so much time focused on the artworks themselves. I hadn't realized what was actually going on, that I was literally buzzing when I got back to the script, that I was finding so much enjoyment in writing the film and in making the film and discovering stuff, that I understood that that was the art, not the pieces themselves, and that there was my participation in the pieces was where the value lay. Now, I know that's a really hard thing to kind of wrap your head around, but if you think about Pak not as an artist, but as a decentralized network, as the Bitcoin of imagination, then we can all be nodes on that network. We are, the piece that kicks this all off is a film called The Node, in which at the very beginning there's an inscription about singularities. We are nodes on the Pak network if we, participate in this thing. So the participation over the course of a year is the gift. That's the art. And what I can imagine Pak hoping will happen is that there is no longer just Pak, the artist. There are 65,000 of them, or however many people. One of the startling discoveries I made was that there are 9,000 owners of Lost Poets. Now, that's not necessarily representative of unique owners, but it's a lot of owners. And if only half of them are actually unique, that would still make Pak the most decentralized network after Bitcoin. I mean, that's wild. That's absolutely insane. So if we start thinking about not Pak is the artist and we collect, no, we are all Lost Poets and we all create. And there's a quote that I pulled up from Pak, where I think it was from 2020. Pak says, create things that help you create tools and techniques. So this idea of infrastructure, this idea of creating the things that help people create, is embedded into what Pak is doing. Then Lost Poets is that. Lost Poets is a set of tools and a set of techniques to allow people to create. And so just, this idea of distributed imagination and distributed creativity that adds value to the human soul. There's a lot of talk about how this is a creative renaissance that we're in the middle of right now. And I fundamentally disagree with that, because I don't think creation or the act of creativity was in need of renaissancing. But what I think is interesting is that Pak has 100% created a renaissance in the value of individual human endeavor, when it's so easy now to default to what we're asked to believe through filter bubbles. Everything is a fork. If you want to learn something, you go on YouTube and you just, devour the simplest, quickest, easiest shortcut to stuff. You go and get the template for WordPress, or, you just download the quick and easy version. Pak asks you to do the work. But if you do the work, as I did, then it's incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, well, Robin, I thank you deeply for coming on the ledger and explaining all what you've done. But I also thank you for your contribution to the space and the added value you bring with your storytelling, because, man, I enjoy your content. And to everyone who's listening, if you haven't watched Robin's movies about Pak, but also covering a variety of different projects, Loot, art blogs, and everything they do on the Defiant, but as well as School of Blog, I highly suggest you do, because it's an added value to the space, and we're lucky to have you, man.
No, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to where we go next, because I honestly don't know. It's going to be, it's so tempting to just go down the rabbit hole with Pak and get lost in the details, and you can totally do that. But I think what I tried to do with the films was really zoom out and not focus on that, but more focus on what were the big ideas here, and it was so satisfying to see that there were some big ideas and how deeply they were embedded into literally everything.
Perfect way to end it. Thanks, man.
Thank you.
That's it. If you haven't watched the movies, I highly suggest you do. You can find them on YouTube, and trust me when I say that they're worth your time. And if you want to explore crypto and NFTs, we've got you covered with Ledger Academy, School of Block, and we've also launched a brand new show called Down the Rabbit Hole. So be sure to check that out as well. This was On the Ledger from Paris with your host Mol Sayed. Till next time, take care. Au revoir. This content is provided for informational purposes only and is the sole expression of our opinion, and should not be relied upon as legal, business, investment, or tax advice. Do your own research. Any loss or profit is your sole responsibility. Stay safe.